Deep in the heart of the countryside lies an old mansion, shrouded in mystery and silence. A tale as chilling as it is heartwarming begins here. A tale of love, loss, and the promise that defied death. Lila, a writer in search of inspiration, moved into the eerie Ashworth Manor, a place rumored to be haunted. But Lila didn't believe in ghosts, at least not yet. Lila, this place is perfect for my new novel. A little creepy, but nothing I can't handle. The manor was as grand as it was foreboding. Its high ceilings, sprawling staircases, and dusty chandeliers told stories of a once glorious past. The walls seemed to breathe secrets. The wooden floors creaked as if echoing footsteps from another time. To Lila, it felt like stepping into the pages of an unwritten story. Days passed, and Lila began noticing peculiar things. Candles flickering without wind, faint shadows moving in the corners of her vision, and, most curiously, the lingering scent of roses. She searched the grounds, but found no signs of a garden. The scent seemed to follow her, appearing at odd times and places, almost as if it were trying to tell her something. Lila, something about this house feels alive. But why roses? There's no garden here anymore. Her nights were restless. She would hear the soft sound of footsteps echoing down the long corridors, but every time she looked, no one was there. On one particularly quiet night, as she drifted into sleep, she felt a strange presence. Opening her eyes slightly, she saw a translucent figure of a man watching her from the corner of the room. His face held a melancholic expression, and though she couldn't explain why, his sadness felt almost tangible. Edward whispered, "Why are you here?" The words, though soft, chilled her to the bone. She sat up abruptly, her heart racing. But when she looked again, the figure was gone. Lila dismissed the experience as a dream. But the next evening, an unexpected sound jolted her awake, a melody. Soft and haunting, the tune of an old piano echoed through the mansion. "Lila, is someone here?" She followed the sound to the grand hall, her footsteps hesitant. The room was bathed in pale moonlight, and to her astonishment, the piano was playing itself. As she watched in disbelief, the figure from her dream materialized before her. His presence was clearer now, a man in his early 30s, dressed in 19th century attire, his form faintly glowing. "Edward, you're not afraid?" Her instinct told her to run, but she didn't. There was something about his presence that felt familiar. "Lila, I should be, but you don't feel dangerous. Who are you?" The man introduced himself as Edward Ashworth, the former owner of the manor. He explained that he had been cursed to remain as a spirit, unable to leave because of a promise he had failed to fulfill. Over the next few days, Edward began to share his story. The more Lila listened, the more she realized how deeply love and loss were woven into the fabric of the manor's history. Edward told her about his life in the 1800s, painting vivid pictures of grand parties held in the very hall they now stood in, of laughter and joy that once filled the walls. But the brightest memory of all was Isabella. She was a woman of rare beauty and spirit, with a laugh that could light up even the darkest corners of Edward's life. They were madly in love, and their dream was to marry and create a life together in the manor. But fate had other plans. One fateful evening, as the sun set over the lake behind the mansion, Isabella had gone for a walk. When Edward found her, it was too late. Her lifeless body was pulled from the water. The villagers called it a tragic accident, but Edward had always blamed himself for not being there to protect her. Overcome with guilt and heartbreak, he made a vow to wait for her, even in death. "Edward, I thought if I stayed, I might see her again. I thought I could undo what had happened. But all it did was chain me here, a prisoner of my own grief." His love for Isabella was eternal, but it had become a torment, anchoring him to the world of the living. "Lila, that's heartbreaking. But why are you here now? Why reveal yourself to me?" Edward hesitated, his expression softening. "Edward, because you remind me of her." Lila felt her heart skip a beat. There was something in his voice, a quiet vulnerability that spoke of centuries of longing and pain. Over the following days, Their interactions grew more frequent. Edward would appear at odd times, offering quiet companionship or helping her with her novel. Lila found herself opening up to him about her own life, her struggles as a writer, and the emptiness she had been trying to fill by isolating herself in the manor. Lila, for a ghost, you're surprisingly charming. Edward, and for a human, you're surprisingly brave. As their bond deepened, Lila began to sense a connection between them that went beyond the ordinary. It wasn't just Edward's story that was haunting. It was the way he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. But every time she caught herself smiling at his words or lingering on his presence, the impossible nature of their circumstances loomed over her. One stormy night, while exploring the attic, Lila stumbled upon a hidden compartment in an old trunk. Inside was a letter addressed to Edward, written in Isabella's hand. As Lila read, her breath caught in her throat. The letter revealed a shocking truth. Isabella hadn't drowned by accident. She had been pushed, murdered by someone jealous of their love. Tears streamed down Lila's face as she clutched the letter. She ran to Edward, her voice trembling. Lila, Edward, you were never to blame. She didn't leave you. Someone took her from you. Edward's reaction was immediate. His translucent form flickered, and the air around them grew cold. The walls of the manor trembled as his grief and anger erupted. Edward, all this time, I thought I failed her. I thought I was the reason. Lila, Edward, stop. This isn't your fault. It was never your fault. Her words seemed to reach him, and the house fell silent once more. Edward looked at her, his expression filled with a bittersweet mix of gratitude and sorrow. Edward, thank you, Lila. You've given me peace. But I think it's time for me to go. As dawn broke, Edward's spirit began to fade. Lila reached out, her voice breaking. Lila, don't go. I don't want to lose you. Edward, you freed me, Lila. But you have your whole life ahead of you. Live it. Love it. That's my promise to you. In a final, fleeting moment, Edward smiled, and then he was gone, leaving behind a single rose. Lila sat by the window, the rose in her hand, her heart heavy yet strangely full. She began writing her novel, pouring her heart into the story of love and loss that had unfolded within the manor's walls. Narrator: some love stories transcend time and even death. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let go. Would you like me to add more? Here's the extended version of your story with added depth and emotional layers. Lila, that's heartbreaking. But why are you here now? Why reveal yourself to me? Edward, because you remind me of her. Lila couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. She studied his face, a face that seemed both timeless and etched with sorrow. His presence was haunting yet comforting, and something deep inside her ached for him. Over the following days, an unexpected connection blossoms. Lila spends hours talking to Edward in the evenings. As the candlelight dances on the walls, they exchange stories. She tells him about her struggles with finding meaning in life and her passion for storytelling. In turn, Edward speaks of his life in the 1800s, painting vivid pictures of a time long gone. Their connection feels natural, even if it shouldn't be possible. Edward often appears by her side as she works on her manuscript, offering suggestions or simply sitting quietly, watching her write. Lila, for a ghost, you're surprisingly charming. Edward, and for a human, you're surprisingly brave. They share moments of lightness, too. Edward teases her about her messy handwriting, and Lila jokes about his outdated fashion. But under the laughter, there's an undeniable tension, a longing that neither of them dares to acknowledge. One fateful night, Lila stumbles upon a hidden truth. A storm rages outside, and the howling wind shakes the old manor. Unable to sleep, Lila decides to explore the attic, a place she had avoided until now. As she rummages through dusty boxes and faded photographs, her fingers brush against an old envelope sealed with wax. The letter is addressed to Edward, written in Isabella's delicate handwriting. With trembling hands, Lila reads the words, her breath catching as she pieces together the truth. Isabella's death wasn't an accident. She had been pushed into the lake by someone who envied their love. The realization sends a chill down Lila's spine. She rushes downstairs, clutching the letter. Lila. Edward. Edward. I found something. Edward materializes in the room, his translucent figure illuminated by the flickering firelight. Lila hands him the letter, watching as he reads it. His face contorts with grief and fury. The air grows heavy, and the walls of the manor begin to tremble. Objects crash to the ground as his anguish consumes the room. Edward, all these years, I thought I failed her. I thought it was my fault, but someone took her from me. Lila. Edward, stop. This isn't your fault. It was never your fault. Her voice breaks through the chaos, and Edward's gaze softens. The trembling stops, and the room falls silent once more. As dawn approaches, Edward prepares to say goodbye. The first rays of sunlight creep through the windows. Edward's form begins to shimmer, growing fainter with each passing moment. Lila feels a lump rise in her throat. Lila, don't go. I don't want to lose you. Edward steps closer, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek, though she feels only a faint cold breeze. Edward, you've given me what I've been searching for all these years, peace. Thank you, Lila. But you have your whole life ahead of you. Live it. Love it. That's my promise to you. A single tear escapes Lila's eye as she watches him fade into the morning light. All that's left behind is a single rose on the floor, its petals glowing faintly as if imbued with his essence. In the weeks that follow, Lila pours her heart into her novel. Sitting by the window, she writes with a newfound sense of purpose. Her book, The Haunting Love Story, becomes more than just a work of fiction. It's a tribute to Edward and the love he shared with Isabella. The rose he left behind sits in a vase on her desk, a symbol of their brief but profound connection. As Lila finishes the final chapter, she looks out at the horizon and smiles faintly. Narrator, some love stories transcend time and even death, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let go. Lila closes her notebook, placing it gently on the table. The sound of a soft breeze carries through the room, and for a brief moment, she thinks she hears Edward's voice. Edward whispering, "Thank you, Lila." A warm feeling washes over her, and she knows she'll never truly be alone.